It was a scary night for football fans on Monday night as player Damar Hamlin collapsed on the field during a game between his team, the Buffalo Bills, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, this is something that you do not, of course, want to see, but Dr. Todd Monroe, a cardiologist with ProMedica, says it's important for people to know CPR, and that something like this needs to be addressed with care. Here's our extended conversation.
When I first watched it, I actually didn't see the event live. I walked into our room and my kids and stepkids were watching the show, watching the football game, and everybody's really quiet. I saw some of the replays, and my initial first reaction was I thought that it was probably a neck injury because I saw his head kind of go back when he tried to make the tackle, and then obviously we all saw him, try to get back up, and he adjusted his face mask, and then his arms kind of went out, and then he fell backwards and collapsed. And, and then afterwards learning that they had to do CPR on the field, one of the other thoughts was maybe he had this blunt trauma to his heart, which I believe is called commotio cordis. It's not something that we use a whole lot. Something that we may see in other sports, maybe more frequently than has been seen in football. Although this is a pretty rare sort of thing to have happen. Generally, what happens in that situation is there's a sudden jolt, which impacts energy to the heart, and when you impact energy to the heart, it at the precise wrong time, it can send the heart into a fatal arrhythmia, which could either be ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia. So, my first thought is that that's most likely the cause, although there's other possibilities that also probably need to be ruled out.
And obviously, he's still in critical condition after that hit. And the thing about it is, there's really a lot of concern right now. So what do you think is likely going through the minds of his doctors that are going to have to just make the right moves to ensure survival here?
Well, so typically what happens when somebody suffers a cardiac arrest and they have to go through CPR, the concern is not just the heart, it's also the brain. Because I guess if we consider what makes each one of us is what happens with our brain. And so one of the things that happens after typically an out of hospital cardiac arrest, for whatever reason it would be, whether it's because of a heart attack or whether it's because of a sudden arrhythmia that could happen for various reasons, or an arrhythmia that can happen in this specific reason, is that people are generally put in what's called therapeutic hypothermia. We call it the ICE protocol. And basically what that is that we're lowering the body's temperature to try to prevent damage being done to the brain. Generally, a therapeutic hypothermia protocol can last generally 24 to 48 hours. And during that time, the patient is sedated, they're on a ventilator, and they're being monitored in multiple different ways. Both superficially and maybe more invasively. And so during that time, there's not a whole lot that's known in terms of like what's going on with the brain function. Although they do have an EEG or an electroencephalogram running during that time, you really don't know how to assess what that patient's prognosis is during that critical 24 to 48 hours. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce or minimize damage that has been done to the brain because of this insult. So I think what's going on, in terms of the doctors that are taking care of him, of the patient, is they're trying to rule out other things that might have caused this. So while it looks like there may have been a blunt force trauma to the chest that may have caused this, I mean, it's probably the most likely thing, they may be ruling out things such as a cervical spine injury. They may be trying to rule out by doing an echocardiogram on the heart. They're trying to assess was the heart function normal going into this event? So, and now the only way you can do that is if they do an ultrasound test on the heart and the heart function looks normal, after the event, then we have to assume that it was normal going into the event. And so that would rule out one of the potential causes of why this might have happened.
And cardiac arrest is a term that we hear quite often. So for people that may think of it as a complicated thing, how would you put it in the simple terms of what happens when someone suffers cardiac arrest?
So when people generally have a cardiac arrest, it's really generally it's a fatal arrhythmia that then prevents the heart from performing its pumping function. And those, typically those two fatal arrhythmias are either ventricular tachycardia, which usually degenerates into ventricular fibrillation, which is the other fatal heart rhythm. And so what those two do is they render the heart unable to pump in an effective manner. And when you lose that effective pumping function, the brain no longer gets circulation of blood, and you pass out. And so some people will pass out after maybe a 10 to 15 second period of time. It's usually relatively quick, but that can happen like during a heart attack. This fatal arrhythmia can occur as one of the early things that happens with a heart attack. It can happen in a situation where you have this blunt force trauma to the chest. It can happen in a situation where, like, people who have a viral infection of the heart muscle, which renders the heart muscle weakened, that arrhythmia can happen because the muscle itself is already weakened.
And one of the things that the media response was to this was CPR. And CPR can really be life-saving in some cases. So could you talk about the importance of people knowing CPR in case they come across a situation like this in everyday life?
Yeah, so CPR and ACLS are very important. So when somebody goes down, not everybody has access to ACLS protocols and automatic external defibrillators. The most important thing when somebody goes down is being able to provide basic life support. And, we're taught probably in school, probably at young ages, of being able to at least how to do CPR effectively. And we know that the most important thing is the chest compressions. We were taught a long time ago that it's chest compressions as well as rescue breathing, but it's truly the chest compressions that are the most important, because if you're doing chest compressions effectively at the speed and the depth that you're supposed to do, that person is going to be exchanging air. And so that exchanging of air can occur with good effective CPR. Now in his case, doing good effective CPR might probably entail getting his shoulder pads off, because shoulder pads, as we know, kind of go down a certain level on the chest, probably below the nipple line. So getting his shoulder pads off was really probably very important. You want the person to be on a flat surface, generally a stable flat surface, because that allows you to get a good 2 inches of compression, which is what you want over the lower part of the sternum.
And one thing I heard after this incident was that you really should be pressing really hard. There should be a lot of pressure that goes into that.
Yes. Yeah, it's not easy to do good effective CPR for a long period of time, which is why, when we talk about doing this with two people and they trade off. I've done CPR in the hospital, and after a good 2 or 3 minutes of good effective CPR, you're kind of exhausted. And so the rhythm or the speed of the CPR is if people who out there remember the "Stayin' Alive" song by the Bee Gees. That's the beat at which good CPR is supposed to be done. So it's a pretty fast, if you can get good 2 inches of compression, and you do it quickly, and then if an automatic external defibrillator is present, getting that in place quickly so that we can identify whether the patient has what's considered to be a shockable rhythm. Shockable rhythms are ventricular fibrillation and ventricular tachycardia.
And as you said that, the scene from The Office when they're doing this came to mind. So I guess remember that. Remember to follow that song in your head. Well, Dr. Todd Monroe, cardiologist with ProMedica, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.